Okay, so in this talk, we're going to take the Humanities Crucial Questions framework and we're going to filter it through various prevalent worldviews that impact our students. First, I want to say is many of our students, but we can't speak too much according to stereotypes and generalizations because the new curriculum is impacting throughout the world. But youth in general, not just an American phenomenon, we're seeing a worldview that's an amalgamation, a morphing of strong postmodern inclinations, but there's some materialism in there, there's some deism in there, and it ends up spilling itself out in a pleasure-seeking, hedonistic lifestyle. And so realizing that it's not always going to be the student fits this framework or that framework. We're going to start off with the postmodern framework. I think the best way to describe it is through their own description. You've got this huge elephant, right? But this one religion, the person's so zoomed in on the elephant, all he sees is the trunk, and he's describing the trunk. And an elephant is like this trunk, and somebody else who's only seeing the right foot is saying, no, an elephant is like this foot with these toenails, and somebody the tail, somebody the back. And you got several different people describing an elephant, but on a zoomed up, only seeing one aspect of the elephant. And what postmodernism would say, according to relativistic theory, is, hey, we're all describing the same thing, but just from different angles. And it stresses non-tolerance. You need to be sympathetic and tolerant of each other because we're ultimately getting at the same thing. If that thing is God, then we're all going the same path, or getting to the same destination, perhaps different paths. But there's an underlying premise, really, in their epistemology here of, hey, Christians, you only see the eyeball. Buddhists, you only see the thigh, but I see everything. I'm the one that can say, hey, you're not looking at it from the proper perspective. And so there is an intolerance towards any religion or belief system that is mutually intolerant. And it stresses, but as long as you're tolerant, you can believe whatever you want. That is as clear of an intolerant dogma as any other religion. And its morality basis is on, hey, you can do whatever you want, be tolerant of others, and be careful not to offend others. Well, that's the problem when you deal with religions and belief systems that have clear standards and distinctions. So, an interesting example at Vanderbilt University, they have said that no Christian groups can distinguish an election of leaders according to whatever worldview. So you could come from different views on sexuality or different views on religion and still be the president of FCA or whatever Christian group, because you can't distinguish. Yet you can have distinctions in fraternities, distinctions in other clubs, but on Christian groups specifically, they say you can't make distinctions. You have to be tolerant, because we'll be intolerant towards you if you're intolerant towards others. So really, some of the underlying premises that you deal with, as far as tolerance is pushed towards a common good, one thing that we do state are self-evident facts, which really comes from deism, and saying, hey, humans have rights. That's self-evident, and so you have to respect human rights. That's our code of morality. As far as reality, as far as origin, even purpose, it's what you make of it. The reality, what's impacting a lot of our students is this freedom from accountability. There's no clear epistemology, no clear morality, so I'm really free to do what I want to do. And one of your acronyms right now that's popular is YOLO, YOLO, and students will just say YOLO, which means you only live once. Do what you want to do because you only live once. And that's the freedom in a relativistic postmodern mentality is you can do that. And that even pervades beauty. Hey, beauty is what you want to make of it. If it's a devastating beauty, but you think it's beautiful, then it's good, Also in community, really, when you get down to it, since this is such a self-serving, independent philosophy, it doesn't leave room for a community base. And ultimately, you use people to get what you want out of them, which goes right into purpose to say, hey, I want to live to do what I want to do because I'm my own God. I set my own standards. So that's the postmodern mentality. On the other hand, in the deistic worldview, which has also morphed a lot from the impacts of postmodernism, materialism, the deistic worldview, you know, the image that describes him is God's the clockmaker, winds the world up, sets it in motion, and removes himself, and the world is a self-contained sphere where everything is guided by the physical. Within the world, there's a complete disconnect from any spiritual reality outside the world. And the reason, two reasons why I still think it's in a prevalent worldview that impacts our students. One is so many of our students who go to Christian schools or to churches have this concept of a God. The God does not interact in their lifestyle at all. Although they wouldn't claim he's deistic because they would have a biblical paradigm, the reality is they're treating him like a deistic God. Secondly, and more importantly, is so much of our current educational practice derives itself from a deistic worldview. So let me explain that. Let me go back a little bit. A history teacher will often say, so that a secular history teacher, so as the world became more towards empirical research and understanding we can quantify science and truth, it moved towards ration and away from religion. That's what they'll say. It moved towards rational thinking and away from religion. And so in that, then you have this enlightenment, you have this explosion of governments that move away from autocratic monarchies that oppress the people to democracies based on human rights, and then you have this explosion of knowledge, and society just exploded the last 100 years based off this worldview moving away from religion to rational thinking, which they'll call secular humanism. And Alexander Pope was a key person to his time frame is so important to understand, because you had the Gutenberg's printing press that started to proliferate reading materials, and as people read more, there's more knowledge acquisition, and there's more construction knowledge on that, and so you are going to see an explosion of knowledge, information, technology, societal advancement, and yet at the same time, throughout all of this, you still see a strong biblical worldview, and concomitantly, on the other side, you have a growing secular humanism. So Pope says, hey, we're all about empirical studies, yet the reality is the push for empirical studies came out of Christians like Francis Bacon saying, hey, we can prove truth according to scientific empirical studies that absolutely parallel what we know from specific revelation in scriptures. But then as man began to do more and more empirical studies, realizing mathematical constants, and be able to say, hey, these are universal natural laws, man began to feel empowered from that, and through that, man takes that in pride to say, we are the end all, and removing God from that, and because God's not a part of this anyways, he's this deistic clockmaker, and Alexander Pope really pushed for that. And so what we don't realize in history is there's these subtle themes that are actually not subtle at all, such as saying, hey, the church age was the dark ages. Really? There was a lot of advancement led right up to a printing press in the church age, and the printing press obviously grew into this, it just exploded knowledge, but at the same time the knowledge is what exploded the Reformation. Printing press 1450, Luther 1517, nailing up the 95 Theses. And so in that, you've got this explosion of church. From there, you've got Galileo, you've got Newton, you've got so many scientists who are embedded in a biblical worldview that would completely disagree with Pope. They're not dark ages. The Enlightenment isn't a divorce from the church, and only knowledge came out of secular humanists. And even you see in the founding of our nation, so much it was on biblical principles, yet at the same time, yes, there is a faction of secular humanists like Thomas Jefferson. But it's so clear to understand deism still impacts our education. We have to constantly filter out, why do we believe this? And did this come from a biblical worldview? Or did this come from a deistic worldview that had been so prevalent? And I think to a degree it's still prevalent, but it's morphed so much with materialism now that this idea it's a self-contained universe. And so if there's a God, it's really irrelevant. Yeah, be good and take care of each other. And maybe, if there's a heaven, then your good outweighs your bad. But the key is it's all focused on this world without any emphasis on the origin, without any emphasis on the destiny. To a degree, there is morality, there is purpose, but it's all about man, taking care of man, the common good of man, because we are the pinnacle of everything. It's about man's glory filling this earth, not about God's glory filling this earth. So that's in a nutshell the deistic mentality and worldview. The materialistic worldview emphasizes the material, the physical. The reality is what we see. Now, postmodernism, the implication is, hey, we've moved on from modernism. The emphasis was on materialism, was on science. You can prove it now. There's more freedom. Not really. The undergirding foundation in postmodernism is still empirical research of what we know and we can say is fact and reality is what we can prove according to natural laws and mathematical constants, scientific research. And then if you can't prove it by material methods, then yeah, believe whatever you want and it's all the same. But there's still this foundation of the epistemology that's still valid is empirical research. And your strong proponents nowadays that have a wide audience, Richard Dawkins and the God Delusion, Christopher Hitchens, who died a couple years back, who just antagonistically says religion is the source of evil and religion represents a backwards society, and as we become more and more advanced, we must move away from religion, from intolerance, from clear dogma to let's keep it to science and to tolerance. Where materialism really fails a coherency test is this idea of, hey, the origins are based on the Big Bang, and we have science that can see the universe moving towards an explosive outgrowth from an initial point. One astrophysicist says you can go back and see 1/60,000th of 1/60,000th of a second right after the Big Bang. The entire universe was the size of a proton, infinitesimal. And so close to wanting to say creation out of nothing, which is exactly what we believe in, yeah, but saying no, that there existed a minute piece of matter that exploded into this infinite universe. But it violates itself on a couple different areas. One is the theory, the principle of non-contradiction. They say everything has a cause and effect, but we don't know what the first cause was, so we won't even talk about it. It violates the law of thermodynamics, where it says everything goes from order to disorder, yet what it says is, hey, this explosion caused everything to go into precise projection to where we have life as we know it on Earth and all the elements that compose that. And so the materialistic worldview really steps away from that and doesn't deal with it. As far as destiny, it just says, hey, we will when we're dead, we're worm food and we'll just decay. And so what implications does that have on life? Hey, live as long as you can, survive of the fittest. That's how animals live. We're just a next progression of evolution in the animal chain. And so live life for yourself. That's even the morality, to protect and promote yourself and use others to get what you want. But it's interesting though. Few materialists live like life has no purpose. That would be nihilism, which is really if all we are animals trying to survive, life has no purpose. And you'll see that spelled out oftentimes in art and in literature. But people always live with purpose. People always want relationships. People desire beauty. And yet this worldview of materialism cannot give an answer for that. It goes without saying that Islamic worldview is very prevalent and continues to grow, and its impact on our students is at varying degrees where they're living throughout this world. So some of the attractive parts of the worldview are, in a lot of ways, it's strongly coherent. And for true followers who follow the Sharia law, there's a lot of coherence there, rooting back all the way from origin to destiny. There are some areas that seem to break down, and specifically, what is that to be a true follower? Should it look like the life of Muhammad, who had several wives, who practiced baptism by the sword and conquering most of the Arabian Peninsula through violence, and emphasizing jihad over neighboring countries or nations that did not practice Islam. So a lot of the origin goes back to similar to the Genesis account. However, one aspect that needs to be spelled out is God is very angry. It's a wrathful God, Allah, in the Islam faith, and so it's man's desire. How do you appease God to placate Him to where you don't receive His wrath? And yet there's no relationship there to ever know, did you completely appease Him? Will you be able to participate in heaven? The only promise that you'll go to heaven after death is to die in a jihad, which leads to a prolific number of suicide bombers. But even in heaven, there's still no concept of relating to God. It's a very man-driven heaven where He's got food and women. And so in that part, there's a lot of lack of coherence with societal values, universal values nowadays. And it's still really, I think, one of the crux where it hits worldview incoherence is dealing with beauty. And dealing with relationship. If God's not triune and God never relates to us, then why in the world are we so relational? Why do we long for relationships? Why do we need relationships? Now, the Muslim answer said, well, hey, the relationships because there's a brotherhood found in Islam, and the world will be united once Islam has converted the entire world. Yet it doesn't answer some of those key questions, but you can see when it's lived out to its fullest. I think Muhammad did flesh it out well, but then it causes incoherences with values that are pretty universal. On one side, you might say with a pantheistic worldview, it does not seem to play a clear presence in Western civilization, but it does in the East. Media like Star Wars and Avatar will quickly say no. It pervades so many of our thoughts, and in a lot of ways, as I've said before, it merges with the prevalent postmodern thought. For example, that there's a growing momentum among some postmodern circles that emphasizes veganism, which has these underlying currents that we are all the same, all nature, all life has the same value. Interestingly enough, that breaks down to where there'll be values stressed on not eating meat, and yet and saving the life of a cow, and yet there's no value placed on the unborn children. And it does obviously conflict directly with the biblical account and worldview of the value of life, and that we are the first fruits of creation, called to and made to subdue the earth and be over the earth. So with pantheism, all, theism, God, everything's God, God is everything, it does pervade thoughts of, hey, you are God, you can decide what's good for you, I'm God. So to that degree, it does seem to work in the postmodern Western sense. Where it does break apart in the Eastern sense is this thought of becoming one with the universal God. And yet the universal God is impersonal. And so the reality is, to become one with that universal God is to lose your personness, to lose personality, to lose desire, to step away from relationships, anything that pulls you to this world, and become one with that world, which again is so divergent from the Christian worldview that we've been created with desire. C.S. Lewis says, if I find in myself a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, then I must be made for another world. We believe God placed, as Ecclesiastes says, eternity in our hearts, infinite desire in our hearts, so that we would desire the infinite being, God. That's how economies and markets are driven, based off unlimited wants and needs. We always have more wants, always have more needs. We keep buying and the market continues to progress. And yet, in the pantheistic view, it would say, no, step away from desire, step away from relationships, do not desire beauty, and become one with this universal spirit. And then when you do die, you lose all consciousness, and there's no stress. And what does that mean with destiny? Well, that is death. You've lost who you are in that, and why do you have individuality in this world? What would be your purpose is built off that individuality. In so many ways, it diverges from the biblical worldview, but it keeps showing up in current prevalent worldviews that we are faced with.